Jordan, this is one for you, I think, but I'm sure, Heather, you'll have something to say on this as well. Rob Evans from Australia, I think, says, it seems to me that the descent of the West into Marxism/communism is inevitable at this point. Unfortunately, particularly with the COVID pandemic, he says, being used to accelerate it. What can we do about this, and how can we reverse it if we can?
Well, I don't think it's inevitable. So I think it's not a foregone conclusion by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, if you look at the United States, for example, there's a fair bit of power on both sides of the political spectrum, and the battle's raging, but it isn't obvious that one side has won. So, and I think the Americans have negotiated their way through worse crises than this. I mean, it isn't obvious to me that this is worse than, well, certainly not worse than the time that Nixon was president. That period of time, say from 66 to about 74, it was pretty, it was much like it is now, except worse, I would say. So I'm not hopeless about this. I think that, and I do think a lot of this is a consequence of radical technological transformation. That's a more unsettling phenomena in some sense, but I don't really have any answers about what to do with that. So,
Francis, let me tack on to this a question. Maybe, Heather, you want to jump on this, because Sherry says, what do you guys think is the best way to peacefully protest against critical race theory in our tax-funded public schools? And it's part of the same conversation, I feel.
Yeah. I guess peacefully protest brings up images of people in the streets, and I don't think that is how CRT is going to get disappeared from the schools. I think that, well, I think we need our schools of ed back.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, and that's a long-term solution that is the only one that will stick. So in the moment, I imagine that, again, your inboxes may also look like mine in this regard, but I certainly hear from a lot of parents and teachers both, whose kids are in schools, both K-12 and higher ed, but especially K-12, saying this is a disaster. What do we do? And I guess I would go back. It's not an operational answer, but I would go back to my answer from before and say, be assured that if you are seeing this, either as a parent or as a teacher or staff or administrator at some school that you are affiliated with, you are not the only one, and you're not the only one who's concerned. I feel certain, and it's impossible to do the numbers from where I'm sitting, but I feel certain that it's never just one person, and it's often a significant minority, and sometimes it's actually a majority of people at an institution who don't like what's happening, are putting their head down and just trying to do what they perceive as their job, or just trying to get their kids through the school because they don't feel like they can make trouble, but they're actually dying inside. They really cannot tolerate what is happening, and find each other, figure out some way to find each other. And this is one of the few places where I would say, like, I am with you, Jordan, on the hyper novel technology being a big part of the crisis that we're living through right now. And that's the thing that makes this different from Nixon era, right? Like, it's just not like that, because they didn't have social media. But one of the things that our hyper connected, hyper novel technology allows us to do is potentially find people and talk privately and establish some rapport and figure out what to do. And I think, with regard to in the schools, know that there are many of us out here who see it and are, doing what we can with bigger platforms, but figure out who it is, who else where you are can actually see this as well. And, just start almost and this is not about CRT in schools, but like when I just engage, I'm here in Portland, Oregon, which is sort of like the epicenter of ridiculous in a lot of ways. And I love it. I love Portland. I love the people here. And there's just a tiny minority of yahoos who are just driving the narrative and driving a lot of chaos here. And when I talk to a barista, a waitress, the person at the front desk at physical therapy, when I just talk to any, at UPS, whatever, and just give any indication when they say something standard and generic that I don't actually fit into the standard generic model that they're assuming is what you have to do small talk now, almost everyone responds with relief and wants to have a real conversation. Almost everyone. I think that actually it's a majority of us who want to be having a real conversation and want this to stop.
I think the evidence for that is pretty clear, is that the extremists on both sides are a very small minority. I wouldn't underestimate the utility of writing a letter. Write a letter to the school board. At least you don't even have to send it. At least you get your arguments down and articulate them. That's something. And then maybe once you do that, you can write the letter. Then you can let it sit for a week and you can think about it. Make sure you got your words right as much as you possibly can. Then maybe send it. It's like there's not much risk there. And, we do have political structures. People aren't involved in them. And I got involved in political structures in Canada a bit when I was younger. And they're so starving for people's participation that it's beyond belief. And so you can make an effect locally in your community or in your state or province or nationally for that matter, if you want to put in the time. So those institutions, well, that's what we have. And so unless you want to generate new institutions, you could try using those. And people think they won't get listened to, and sometimes they don't. But letters have more effect than you think. So that's something at least, isn't it? And it's not going to expose you to a tremendous amount of risk, especially if you word it carefully and you write before you're so angry that you can't control yourself.